Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of The Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. Conversion therapy is in the news all over the place. What is the latest on this widely discredited but still somehow legal practice? A class action suit has been filed on behalf of incarcerated trans people being forced to detransition. What are they experiencing? A homophobic sermon in Indiana continues to have legs. Why are we still talking about one church's hateful words? And where are this week's panelists finding queer joy in the news? Joining us this week to answer those questions and so many more, reporter for the Ohio Capital Journal right here, unsurprisingly, in Ohio, Susan Tebben. Susan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Training director at Investigative Reporters and Editors, a nonprofit dedicated to improving the quality of investigative reporting, Adam Rhodes. Adam, it's great to have you here.
Hey, really happy to be here.
And our first ever repeat panelist breaking new ground for This News is So Gay, digital editor for Indiana Public Broadcasting and the official sports ball correspondent for This News is So Gay, Lauren Chapman. This is my first time saying it. Lauren, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back and letting me haunt your wonderful program.
It's great to have you all here. Our LGBTQ Reporters Roundtable is now assembled, so let's dive in. A new report was released in late July indicating that despite some states, their attempts to ban conversion therapy, the widely discredited and wildly harmful attempts to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, conversion therapy is still very much going on. Adam, can you give us the bird's eye view with this new report? How prevalent still is conversion therapy?
So like you said, it is still a relatively common practice, surprisingly common. There are a number of estimates out there. Recent research by the Trevor Project has identified more than 1,300 active practitioners of conversion therapy across the country. That's 48 states and the District of Columbia. There is one national survey that recently found that 70% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults in the United States report having experienced conversion therapy. The Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law has counted about like 750,000 LGBTQ plus adults have experienced conversion therapy in their lifetimes. That's almost 750,000 LGBTQ plus adults. So it is a far-reaching practice that I think a lot of us, both queer and non-queer people, think is a relic of the past, but it is ongoing to this day. And I think especially with a lot of the anti-LGBTQ plus animus we're seeing, is particularly targeting trans people and trans youth now.
Well, some of that anti-LGBTQ animus, many folks are saying, comes from the Trump administration. And Adam, back in March, you wrote about how, indeed, the Trump administration is actually enabling conversion therapy. What's going on there?
Among the many executive orders that Donald Trump rescinded when he took office again was a Biden-era executive order that banned federal funds from going to conversion therapy. At the time, it was the really only federal protection against conversion therapy. So that is significant. And now a lot of, as we've all said, like the anti-LGBT animus coming from the Trump administration is emboldening a lot of state lawmakers to either more actively challenge these conversion therapy bans, as we saw in Virginia and Michigan, or really just at least bring conversion therapy, back, I think, to the public conversation and public consciousness, even if it is something that is banned in the state, because I think it's important to at least mention that 51%, or like at least more than half of LGBTQ plus Americans actually live in states that ban conversion therapy.
Ohio is not one of those states that bans conversion therapy statewide. Susan, it's not great here in Ohio. Where are we with the prevalence of conversion therapy?
Well, yes, as you say, we still don't have any outright bans of conversion therapy or anything like that. And there was one that was introduced in 25 by a Democratic legislator. And as you know, and I'm sure our listeners are aware, Ohio has a very super minority of Democrats. Whereas the Democrats are doing what they can, they're trying to get their policies out, but it's very difficult. And it's a very steep uphill climb for Democrats to get any movement on their legislation of any kind. So that conversion therapy ban probably isn't going to see a whole lot of. I mean, it was introduced in May, and it is now August, and we haven't seen anything on it. So hard to say at this point. I mean, in 2023, the Trevor Project had the data that said we were one of the 5 worst as far as people that support conversion therapy, states that support conversion therapy, along with Texas, Minnesota, Missouri, and Pennsylvania. So that doesn't make it look good for us in terms of whether conversion therapy will stand in the state. And we have conservative, the supermajority includes a lot of conservatives that may or may not believe in this stuff, but they may or may not believe it's a priority to take any stands on it.
Yeah. And in Indiana, Lauren, you all have one of those ban on bans?
Yeah, we sure do. State lawmakers really like to limit what local lawmakers can do, and Senate Enrolled Act 350 2023, in fewer than 100 words, does exactly that. It bans local government units, which includes counties, cities, towns, and micro local government townships in Indiana, from banning conversion therapy if the person or practice has a license. That legislation was proposed in response to West Lafayette City Council's attempt to ban conversion therapy in 2021.
We should say that nationally, and I'm going to let you take this one, Lauren, there is a Supreme Court case that could affect all of this.
There certainly is, and it has all of the usual ingredients. But at issue isn't actually conversion therapy or state interests in protecting children. It instead focuses on whether or not a law that censors certain types of conversations between counselors and clients violates the First Amendment. The case is Chilles versus Salazar. Katie Chilles is represented by the right-wing legal group behind most of the anti-LGBTQ legislation in the country over the last 5 years, the Alliance Defending Freedom. Chilles says the ban censors her ability to offer what she describes as voluntary counseling. The thing that I find really, really interesting about this case is that if the Supreme Court finds in favor of Chilles, that could open the floodgates on a number of other laws. For example, Indiana's gender-affirming care ban for transgender minors includes an aid and abet provision, threatening the licenses of providers who discuss gender dysphoria or provide any resources to families. But if that becomes a First Amendment issue, things could get really messy. And a number of anti-abortion laws also include similar language. So this very, very narrow scope of the Supreme Court's decision on this issue could have some really far-reaching effects that would have beyond just conversion therapy.
Lauren Chapman, you can't be our sports ball correspondent and our Supreme Court correspondent. It's too much.
I just want to talk about Bostock v. Clayton County, Georgia all day, every day. Give me a podcast for that.
Yes, we are launching that next week. We'll get on that. All right. Well, so much more to talk about with conversion therapy, and I suspect this is a topic that's going to come back to us week after week. But moving on to another topic, a class action suit has been filed in Georgia by nearly 300 incarcerated trans people who have been forced to detransition because of their state's refusal to allow gender-affirming care, which this lawsuit alleges is cruel and unusual punishment. There is a great article in the 19th that I highly encourage everyone to check out. It's written by Candace Norwood, and I do not want to steal her thunder because Candace will be a panelist here on This News is So Gay in just a few weeks. But Adam, I know this is a topic that you've written about before, trans individuals who are incarcerated and accessing care. I also get the sense, Adam, this is just not a topic that we're talking about enough. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, totally. I do just want to say I just have to shout out Candace as well. I turn to Candace's work all the time. Candace is an amazing journalist. Has done really good coverage on like HIV criminalization laws as well, which I've covered in the past. But, back to this class action lawsuit and the experiences of trans people behind bars. Basically, all of the stigma, all of the abuse, all of the mistreatment that trans people just in the world are experiencing, level that up by, like 100%, something like that. Like, it is really difficult to overstate, or impossible to overstate, just the level of violence that trans people experience behind bars. In a number of states, trans women or trans people are housed according to their sex assigned at birth. And so that means for trans women, they're housed in men's prisons, trans men are housed in women's prisons. And in many, 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 many of those cases, the trans people self-select or request solitary confinement out of genuine fears for their safety. Trans people are overwhelmingly victims of verbal assault, physical assault, sexual violence by other incarcerated people and prison staff alike. I've communicated for years with a number of trans women in New Jersey prisons who have said that they are routinely assaulted by officers and other prisoners, that they are sexually assaulted, they are stabbed, and that they are forced to spend 23 hours a day essentially in a cell out of genuine fear for their safety. And I think, the UN has had a lot of research and a lot of condemnation about solitary confinement as torture, but, it puts these trans people in a position where they have to select basically like psychological torture or physical and sexual torture, which is a horrific place to put them in. And then with now what's going on with the Trump administration, several states, again, are more emboldened to ban gender affirming care in incarcerated settings. That is a pattern that I have seen and covered for years. Back when gender affirming care bans were really first rolling out several years ago, there were a lot of provisions in bills that banned public funds from going to corrections institutions, that are banning these funds from going to these kind of procedures in corrections institutions. So it is absolutely something that just like hasn't been covered enough, hasn't been talked about enough. And, trans people are already incredibly vulnerable across the globe and in the United States right now. And these are, I would say, the most vulnerable trans people among us.
Yeah, and Susan, as Adam just said, this is an issue not just about gender affirming care and access to gender affirming care, but obviously where trans female inmates are actually housed. And it was a hot topic here in Ohio this week with a recent article about one particular inmate. Susan, can you tell us about Rikara Janelle Dior?
Yeah, so the Ohio Newsroom covered this really well. I have to give credit to them with this. She's a transgender woman that's serving time at the Grafton Correctional Institution, which is it's a men's prison in Lorain County. And, complained about conditions, complained about being in a men's prison, obviously, as a transgender woman. That was not comfortable. Asked to be transferred to the Ohio Reformatory for Women, which is where a woman would go. And that was denied even after she had changed her birth certificate to say female, and then was raped by a male inmate. And then the ODRC has told the Ohio Newsroom that they were placed in a single cell. As Adam was saying, sometimes that happens and sometimes it's requested, and this, it seems like, was something that needed to be done. If not transferred to the women's reformatory where a woman would be. She is still filing lawsuits. She's still trying to get her self-moved. And it's just a situation where she's reaching out for help and saying, I don't understand why this is happening to me, why this just can't be a thing where I get moved to a women's prison. And unfortunately, as Adam has talked about, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons says 99% of incarcerated trans women are in men's facilities. So, a problem in Ohio, no problem nationwide.
Yeah, and I just also want to highlight that one of the executive orders that came out during the Trump administration specifically barred trans women from being housed in women's federal facilities. That obviously extends to federal ICE detention as well. I think a lot of folks might say this is something that we that is just coming to the fore, as with a lot of trans issues that a lot of folks just have not clued into this or paid attention to it. But this has been the safety of trans people in prisons and jails is something that goes back decades. Actually, a seminal Supreme Court decision, Farmer v. Brennan, was actually because a trans woman filed a lawsuit over violence that she experienced behind bars. The reason that prison officials are not allowed to be willfully indifferent to the suffering of prisoners and that it is considered cruel and unusual punishment for them to do so is because a trans woman fought the abuse that she was experiencing. So all of these like safety protections, and this is a lawsuit or a Supreme Court decision that has been cited tens of thousands of times in far-reaching civil rights lawsuits. So I just think it's important to talk about like both the history and like the severity of the abuse that they experience.
Yeah, and it's an interesting theme that we're talking about conversion therapy. We're talking about this, and in both situations, we're talking about, oh, people might not think this is actually a problem. When we keep saying this about these issues and saying, oh, people might not know about this, I don't think that could be an excuse anymore, because there are journalists all over the place telling these stories, and there's journalists in Ohio and there's journalists nationally, and advocacy groups, the people themselves telling these stories. It's not enough anymore to say, these stories aren't out there. It's a matter of whether anyone's listening.
Well, we are certainly listening, and I suspect we are going to return to this topic in a few weeks when Candace joins us. Thank you all for that. Well, Lauren, with you back on the show, we get to update folks on a story that, quite frankly, I thought we were leaving behind 3 or 4 weeks ago, but it is back. To catch people up, first tell our listeners about the very distinctly not love thy neighbor sermon that went viral right there where you are in Indiana. And by the way, not just in the state of Indiana, but I understand pretty geographically close to you.
Yeah, they're not to reveal too much about my location for safety reasons, but they're only a couple blocks away from me. So, yeah, the Sure Foundation Baptist Church hosted a men's preaching night, and a lay preacher, Stephen Falco, made a number of inflammatory comments about LGBTQ people, including we should pray for their deaths, plain and simple. And when the video picked up traction, the church doubled down on those comments, including its pastor, Justin Zhang, suggesting that queer people are terrorists and recommendations that we should shoot ourselves in the head. But the statement from the church, doubling down on the remarks, said, of course, they weren't calling for vigilante violence. They were calling for the state to step in. Indiana's religious left groups at that time, like Concerned Clergy of Indianapolis, decried the sermons in response, calling it pastorally irresponsible and morally wrong.
Now, we didn't get to cover, and I accept that sometimes news happens after we record, which quite frankly is annoying. And if everyone could stop doing that, no more news on Tuesdays, folks. Please keep it before Mondays and after Wednesdays. But there were protests against this church.
Yeah, certainly. So in addition to that pushback, a small protest gathered in front of the church, again on Indianapolis's northwest side. The group held signs including bigotry is not biblical, with a parenthetical ask for works cited. Members of the church were seen outside of the protest as the crowd chanted love, not hate. I think it might not have been as well attended because it happened to happen at the exact same time that there was a protest at the State House trying to rally support for the future fight for trans rights at the State House.
My favorite part of that story truly is that when the protest was happening, the listed sermon for that day in that church was about love thy neighbor. So you can't script that kind of irony. But somehow, Lauren, your lieutenant governor got involved. And I would just like to say, I find that a lot of the stories trace back to lieutenant governors. Susan and I are used to that here in Ohio, but I am seeing a narrative thread of it's the lieutenant governor who's doing the thing. But go for it.
So I think Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, has a tendency to do that himself. We've had a pretty good run of lieutenant governors in Indiana. So to set the scene a little bit, Micah Beckwith has most recently waded into controversy by calling the 3/5 compromise a great move. Beckwith is a pastor from the suburban county just north of Indianapolis. His political involvement started with anti-mask and anti-vaccine protests at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also got involved in legislation on so-called materials harmful to minors through his involvement in his local library board and pushed for book bans. He ran for lieutenant governor in a bit of an unorthodox route. The lieutenant governor is selected by the state party convention, and so there aren't really mechanisms to campaign for it, but he did it anyway, and he defeated Governor Mike Braun's selection for running mate, who had also earned an endorsement from Donald Trump. And to finish the picture, Micah Beckwith describes himself as a Christian nationalist. His Twitter account has a tendency to be what drags him into the headlines. So on May 30th, he made a post that said, "Pride Month alert, the rainbow beast is coming for your kids." And so while on a program on the Evansville PBS station, WNIN, we love them, in July, he defended that post. And this is where we get back to Sure Foundation Baptist. The pastor, Justin Zhang, reposted Beckwith's comments on the WNIN program and said Beckwith would be welcome at one of our church services. And Beckwith reposted it. The repost was taken down after people noticed and asked questions about it. Beckwith's communications director said the lieutenant governor unequivocally denounces all calls for violence directed at the LGBTQ community. However, Beckwith has said in a couple of different ways that the history of the LGBTQ movement is driven by a, quote, demonic spirit, and he's called Pride, quote, ritual child sacrifice with glitter and hashtags, which frankly is the only way to do child sacrifice.
I was going to say, that sounds like a sleigh. A literal sleigh.
Honestly, work, Micah.
I am so not okay. There's something deeply wrong with me. The entire time when I was like, this rainbow beast, where are they? I was just at Market Days and I did not see a single rainbow beast.
I want to remind everyone that Adam will be launching his podcast next week called I Am So Not Okay. So that's coming up really soon.
And you've already got a mascot. It's a Rainbow Beast mascot. I can't
Oh my
wait.
gosh,
With a Rainbow
yes.
Beast mascot. I love
I'm
it.
absolutely the butch to be your rainbow beast. Let's go.
Yes, let's do it. I'm so ready.
It's so much happening right now here in week 7 of This News Is So Gay. I just want to say I am not at all overwhelmed. That was me telling me. I do want to remind folks, you are listening to This News Is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck from the Buckeye Flame. Joining me this week are Susan Tebben from the Ohio Capital Journal, Adam Rhodes from Investigative Reporters and Editors, and Lauren Chapman from Indiana Public Broadcasting. And it is indeed public broadcasting that I want to talk about for a few minutes. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has announced that it is shutting down after President Trump signed a law that is going to claw back around $1.1 billion in public broadcasting money. Adam, you work with a national nonprofit dedicated to, as I said earlier, improving the quality of investigative reporting. Can you just talk about generally, and we're all going to weigh in on this one, can you talk about generally what it means for our field, the loss of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, what that means for our field and what that also means for queer content?
Yeah, I think, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in and of itself is, immensely important to the fabric of American democracy. It helps fund not just NPR, but member stations all around the country, same with PBS stations. And without this money, some stations will be hurt harder than others. Like what we think of as like principal NPR is able to weather the storm obviously a lot better than like smaller member stations around the country. I've seen some stations that have had to lay off significant numbers of staff. And obviously with less journalists in the newsrooms, that means like less stories being covered. And I think as queer journalists, we all understand that like LGBTQ plus news isn't one of the things that sticks around when cuts happen. And so it is a loss for queer people in these communities that will not have important accountability focused journalism focused on their rights, their experiences, and their humanity. The queer journalists that want to tell these stories now don't have a space for that to happen. So I think it is just really, really far reaching.
Lauren Chapman from Indiana Public Broadcasting. First of all, I would like to say that this probably was the longest 2 minutes of your life waiting to weigh in on this one. So please know that I feel that deeply. Where do we start here right now, Lauren?
Yeah, I just want to echo Adam for just a second that defunding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, its dissolution, is going to have far-reaching effects. CPB also handled a lot of the music licensing on community radio stations across the country. I mean, there is going to be a huge effect, and it's predominantly going to affect smaller radio stations, smaller communities, and rural communities as well. I'm actually a board member for the Public Media Journalists Association. There's a little bit of a running joke in public media that if you took away all the queer journalists, you'd have like 12 people left. When Trixie Mattel demanded we make a mainstream queer news network to compete with Fox News, she was kind of talking about public media. And unfortunately, I'm one of the journalists who is losing her job. My shockingly queer state government reporting team will be laid off on December 27th. We were notified before the federal cuts came down, after Indiana defunded Indiana's 13 NPR and PBS stations in its 2-year budget at the 11th hour of the legislative session. And so in Indiana, we're already seeing stations that have laid off all of their staff, have become pass-through stations that can no longer be the voices of their community because there's nobody left to do it.
Hashtag hire
I literally was about to
Lauren
say, everybody hire Lauren Chapman.
You should have seen my jaw
Yes.
drop. I didn't know that. I'm so sorry.
And I should pull back the curtain to our listeners. I do let folks know, our panelists know the topics we're going to be covering. And I really did reach out to Lauren in advance because I did know this to make sure that Lauren was okay, that this is the direction we were headed. And to my knowledge, Lauren said, yes,
And
it is
she said, let me at it. Let's go.
Let me at it.
Put me in, coach.
I was going to say they can't fire you.
I mean, they already did.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
They can't do it twice. And Susan, Ohio, never wanting to be left behind. We're making our own cuts here. Tell listeners about that.
Well, actually, as you know, Ohio can be an overachiever sometimes. So they actually had made the cuts in the state operating budget before the federal budget had really been ironed out. It was just something that the budget is like 800 pages. So it's hard for us journalists over here to try to get through everything. So I had been covering the national cuts to Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which already, I was talking to your Idea Stream, to WOSU, to, many of the people here. And they're saying like Idea Stream is a huge network that includes the Ohio channel, which is basically the C-SPAN for the state legislature. They cover the hearings, live stream the hearings, live stream the sessions of the House and Senate, which was really helpful during the pandemic when people couldn't get there. And so they're talking about their services may be consolidated. They don't know for sure what that looks like yet. And then you're looking at staffing cuts just from the federal stuff. So when you look at that, it's already you're talking about cuts, and then you're talking about smaller, like as Adam was saying, the smaller stations. Yes, they are there for news. Yes, they are there for notification of things, but they are also emergency alert systems for rural counties, for places that don't maybe have as good connection to broadband, as good connection to other news stations. Like I used to live in Southeast Ohio, and you have to, wherever you are may not have the TV broadcast stations that are covering your area. So it's important to have those things, say when a flood breaks out or something like that. So you're losing those services on top of losing, news services and, people that can represent the people that are living in those towns. So then you have the state budget on top of the billions of dollars lost federally. The state budget also cut. It's a small little line item section in the budget called the Broadcast Educational Media Commission. So that's specifically mostly programming. So you're talking about grants for educational programming for kids and things like that. That's took some cuts this year via earmarks and things that when the executive budget came out from Governor Mike DeWine, he had kept a certain amount of these and said we should do this. And when it went through the system, the process of the budget, the House and Senate made their cuts, and they look like small cuts on its face, but we're looking at 3% next year, and even more than that the year after that. And when you're talking about federal cuts and adding on these state cuts, it's all, as we're talking about, bigger stations might be able to weather the storm. Smaller stations are looking at, crumbling under these losses. You have WYSO, which is in Yellow Springs, which is a very small, just became an independent station. They don't need the $300,000 that they might be losing to be cut from their budget because they're just trying to start up again. So it's a lot of piling on of things while we're not needing to pile on to things.
And just to be to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit as far as funding goes, because of that public safety mechanism, a lot of your PBS stations or your dual licensee PBS and NPR stations, they're the ones who are going to see the biggest cuts to their budgets. So in Indiana, I believe WNIN was highlighted by an NPR story, and they're seeing something like a 50% reduction in their budget from CPB and state funding. And so Indiana's budget cut $6.7 million, and that represents less than 0.001% of the state budget. But that's going to end up decimating a lot of stations.
And I just want to be clear with folks in case anyone's like, why are they still talking about this? Because both queer content and queer reporters, LGBTQ plus content, LGBTQ plus reporters are going to be deeply, deeply affected by these cuts.
And I think it's important, too, to note that there are some stations that are connected to universities around the country. And I think that some people make that connection and say, oh, they're fine. They're held up by an institution such as a university. But universities are losing their funding left and right as well. And plus, you don't know from university to university how much support that these public media stations really have. Like you have WOUB here that's supported by Ohio University, and WOSU, which is obviously Ohio State University. You'd have to go individually to see, are these universities really supporting these places, or are they looking for a way to cut them off? WYSO is a situation where they were with Antioch College, but Antioch College wasn't doing so great in the money situation, so they were looking to stay afloat. So WYSO said, we're going to break off before this loses any more steam. So you can't really, assign, if it looks like people have benefactors, it looks like public media has a benefactor, we can't trust that anymore because there's so much funding being cut in so many different ways that it all piles on at once.
And I think the most important thing that we all need to walk away with is, again, let's make this trend. #hire Lauren Chapman.
Exactly.
There it is. Well, we started a contest last week to name our now recurring segment, Spotlighting Queer Joy. And I regret to inform you all that, okay, yes, there were definitely some submissions, but I am also saying there's not a winner yet. Again, there were entries, but they were, let's just say the contest is still open. So if you have a good name for our weekly segment on queer joy, please email it to editor@thebuckeyeflame.com. That's me. And we will get you a Buckeye Flame hoodie if we then use that name. Susan, do you have a name?
Yes, I have a name, Revenge of the Rainbow Beast. Why are we losing this?
Wait.
Oh, come on. Yes.
Susan for president. I'm obsessed.
Yes.
I'm not qualified, but yes.
Listen, I don't think qualifications are really a problem anymore.
I'll be your Secretary of State. Let's do this.
Oh my God, Vice President.
Remember back in episode 6 when I had control over this show? That ship has sailed. So in the meantime, we're going to cue our new sound effect. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but let's talk about queer joy. My colleagues, please share with me your favorite recent story of queer joy that you are seeing out there in the news. Adam Rhodes, let's start with you.
Okay, mine is so stupid, of course. But my little piece of queer joy is that Gilded Age got renewed for season 4 because I have to know what happens to Bertha Russell and her gorgeous husband. If they get divorced, he is welcome to come to my house. And that's what I'm concentrating on, is that I will be able to see Cynthia Nixon and Christine Baranski on my television again very soon.
We're here for it. We're here for it. Susan Tebben, recent story of queer joy that you've seen out there?
Well, I'm a very serious journalist, and I don't do anything but watch journalism-related things. However, if you know the reality show Destination X, which if you don't, you should. It's on Peacock. No ads. I'm just love it. It's a reality show where they have to figure out where they are based on clues, blah, blah, blah. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is the host, which is 5 stars. There's 2 competitors on this. Their names were Allie Bross and Mac Fitzgerald. Allie Bross actually on the show had a showmance with a male competitor. After the show, they dated for a while. What everybody found out after the show aired was that Allie Bross and Matt Fitzgerald, who had not really liked each other on the show, are now together as a nice queer couple. And my wife and I are completely obsessed with it. And I have never not been able to follow anyone else's storyline ever since, because these 2 are, and now they're on Instagram just doing all these hilarious things. And so if you haven't watched Destination X, watch it and then see if you can read into the tension we didn't know about between Allie Bross and Mac Fitzgerald.
So much television queer joy. Lauren Chapman, where have you found a story of queer joy?
I found my story of queer joy in public media, and specifically in Ohio. WYSO in Yellow Springs, Ohio, is an NPR station that does some really beautiful storytelling, including a series on Indigenous voices. But I want to talk about Translucent, which is a new series that they just launched, which is designed to amplify trans voices. Lee Wade, the program's host and producer, used his own story as the pilot episode. And it's a conversation he had with his father about his transition just weeks after his dad returned home from a 3-year prison sentence. The bit of their conversation that absolutely destroyed me and filled me with queer joy, and mirrored my own coming out, was the response Lee's dad had to his concern about him coming out. His dad said, "You see how you smile? That makes me smile." It's genuinely beautiful storytelling and such a beautiful celebration of our trans siblings. And I'm just, it's so perfect. Lee, somebody hire Lee when he graduates.
The Indiana lady's showing up the Ohio Reporter with all that.
Well, I will say we had all this summer for the past 11 weeks, we have had the most incredible intern at the Buckeye Flame via the Cleveland Foundation, Caitlin McNally. And Caitlin put together for us somewhere around week 3 or 4, a post called 16 LGBTQ plus Ohio podcasts that you should be listening to. And one of them was indeed Translucent. And another one was This News Is So Gay, because it was required. So there's that. Let's just do one quick hit question before we find out what you all are working on right now. Congratulations to out LGBTQ plus 3-time Olympic ice dancer Paul Poirier, and I might be butchering his name, and so I'm sorry for that, Paul. But Paul got engaged to his boyfriend in a pretty adorable Instagram post that made me smile. So to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, none of this week's panelists are accomplished ice dancers, but I feel that we all could be if we had the right song. So what I need from all of you for our quick hit question for the week, regardless of your talent on the ice, what song would you choose to wow the judges in your Olympic ice skating debut? Lauren Chapman, what song would it be for you?
See, I originally thought that it would be Pink Pony Club, but I think perhaps Chappell Roan's most recent single, The Subway, would be good. You either mourn your breakup with the green-haired sapphic or you live long enough to become the green-haired sapphic. And I think ice dancing is ready for that storytelling.
Amazing. Susan Tebben, what song?
I think I'm going to go with a cover, which is Haim's cover of Shania Twain's That Don't Impress Me Much, partly because it's slow.
Oh, major slay. I'm obsessed with that.
Yes.
That don't impress me much.
Partly
wonderful.
because it's slow and I don't give myself any favors and I want to be more forgiving, but also because that song has just been living in my head.
I love it. Adam Rhodes, what song are we choosing?
I think I am going to be very of the moment. I'm going to pick something from K-pop Demon Hunter, the show that I'm obsessed, or the movie that I'm obsessed with now. I think it has to be Golden. It was either going to be Golden or Your Idol. And I may not be a talented ice dancer, but I did play hockey for 10 years. So I'm confident in my ability to do like a little bit of movement.
Well, I do want to remind our listeners that the correct answer was, of course, Hold On by Wilson Phillips. Thanks, everybody, for playing. I do want to hear what you all are working on. Susan, what's coming up next for you?
So the Ohio Democratic Party just announced that their rural caucus has got some new leadership. And, you know, for queers and everyone else in Ohio, rural populations are getting their own set of federal funding cuts and all the good stuff. And they have their own needs, you know, farmers and, you know, all that stuff. So I'm working on talking to them about what needs to happen to get rural voices out there and get all of those residents what they need.
Amazing. Lauren Chapman, what are you working on?
Me and my team are doing the work until we sweep up the floors and put up the chairs. So I'm following Indiana's proposed rule that would ban updating gender markers on driver's licenses for trans Hoosiers, in mostly cover letters. Other than that,
Yes, she's working on getting hired.
Oh my God, cover letters. I had
We love
flashbacks to that. I think I just got nauseous.
Yeah. I'm out.
Well, before you get sick, Adam Rhodes, what are you working on?
I've got a couple things kind of in the works right now on trans folks in ICE detention, some new pre-exposure prophylaxis updates, things like that. And I will have more soon as they kind of come down the pike.
Well, what an incredible episode for this week. I want to thank this week's roundtable, Susan Tebben from the Ohio Capitol Journal, Adam Rhodes from Investigative Reporters and Editors, and Lauren Chapman, as of this recording, still with Indiana Public Broadcasting. Thank you so much to the three of you.
Thank you. Hire Lauren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, and that's all we have time for this week. If you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend, rate and review it on your favorite podcasting app, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. In the meantime, read LGBTQ+ news, share the stories of LGBTQ+ reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ+ newsrooms. Until next week, friends.